Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And this week we're going to talk all about how to render those different types of cloth on your miniature. We're going to talk wool, we're going to talk silk. It's going to be fun. Let's get into it.
The strict technomancer that is Vincey V. Let us get to the technique and learn it, Vincey V.
I am painting up the cheerleader from Miniac, which is just a really fun bust. I love it. It's kind of designed exactly the way I like busts, which is there's lots of space here to explore. He left lots of sort of neutral space where the artist can render wherever they want while still giving you enough detail to tell a story. So I'm really having a great time. And she is a cheerleader. Now, in my case, the way I'm rendering her is Buffy the Vampire, Slayer. You'll get it when you see the mini. But at any rate, I'm to the point where I'm going to do her sort of sweater. And she's wearing like a cheerleader top or whatever. I don't know what they're called. But so we're going to talk about how to render that as some different types of material today. And I'm going to take you through how we can use texture in our highlighting to tell a different story about what exact kind of cloth we're dealing with. So let's go over to the desk and let's get painting. Alright, so here's the state she's at right now. As you can see, we've progressed a lot on her skin, her hair, we've got a lot of that stuff in place, but her shirt is still very dark. We're going to be using this violet red, and I'm just going to start by turning most of the surface here that color. Now, she has a little bit of light kicking up from the back. There's a little bit of motivated lighting on one side of her. So we're going to focus mainly here on her sort of front and right side. But we just get down a good solid base coat. And the reason I'm really lasering in on this is because when you're going to do this establishment through texture, you do need to really make sure you have one clean, solid base coat. You want to pick something slightly darker than your mid-tone, but not too much darker. Okay, so that's where we're going. I then need to knock in some of my shadows, transition down in, and transition over to my stronger shadows on that side. So I mix a little bit of that violet red with Payne's gray, and I glaze in some of my soft shadows here to create the area away from the light. An important thing about this, when you're using this texture in the darker areas, you're not really going to see the texture. We're not going to really heavily texture most of this shadow. And that's because light, where it shines, reflects the texture. In the darker areas, the shadowed areas, you really don't see much of that texture reflected, so we're going to be very minimal, if any, when we get to those later steps. Okay, so far I haven't shown you anything magical. We painted a thing of color, and we added in some nice shadows. But we're still a long way away from doing anything impressive. So now, let's get to the actual work. So here I'm going to use these two additional pinks, and that's what we're going to shape the whole sweater with. And here we're going to do this as a wool sweater. So we want this nice, very what would be, low thread count, I guess? Yeah, that'd be right. Basically big, fat, visible threads, right? A classic sort of wool sweater that's knitted by hand where you can really see the individual threads. So, what are we going to do? Well, I start by just mixing in a little bit of my slightly brighter pink into my violet red, and I'm going to start making a little pattern of crisscrossies down the miniature. So you can see I just pick a point, you can pick anywhere, and we just start knocking in these little lines. They need to be at an angle like a V, okay? We're effectively making little crisscrossed V's. And you're just trying to knock in a little small line. You can vary the size here. The smaller you make the little boxes, the little threads you're making, the higher the thread count effectively, right? So you can actually play with this in a lot of different ways. There's sort of a place where it'll eventually be too big and won't make sense anymore. Sweaters aren't made from 4 threads. But nonetheless, you can vary the size. And so I just keep making my little V's down, one section of lines, then the next 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 section of lines. It's a repetitive process. You get it. Now, I do go back after I have all those in and try to clean them up. You want to leave the space in between, the little shadow you're leaving. It should be extremely small and minimal and tight. So don't worry about it if you don't nail it on the first pass. I go back in, I take that same paint, and I'm going to, as I go over this, I'm going to slowly shape these up. Now, as we go from here, we're going to cover less and less each time, okay? That is to say, I'm going to do traditional layering where we have areas of highlight and shadow, but the way I'm going to do that is by covering over less of my threads each time. Okay? Now, here on her chest, it won't be super visible because most of her chest is like kind of a more or less flat plane facing upwards, so it'd be pretty evenly lit. We're going to create some minor variation, but you'll really see it over on like her right shoulder where she has an exposed part up top on the sphere, but as we go down the cylinder of the arm, it's going to become much darker. Okay, so I start mixing in then additional pinks, going up to the bright pink. And so I'm just going to talk here as you see me go through this, but what I'm doing is I once again just covering each little cross of the V, each check, bop, 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 right down the line, filling over each little box. Now, when I get to the edge of where I want that highlight area to be, I don't fill the entire square, the entire thread. So there's going to be some point where the light sort of starts to fade, and so I only paint like half the thread, or the very top of the thread, or something like that, to show that we transitioned from it being an area of brighter light into an edge highlight for that section, that row, that column of threads. Okay? And so I continue working my way up, adding in more and more eventually of the very, very bright pink until I get to the center here, right? Where we have kind of these two light lines around what would be sort of her breasts, the very top of her shoulder, and so on. Just building that up, and you can see now how each time I then do that same trick. Eventually we get to the edge of that brighter light. That then becomes the edge on that one, and so on. Now, a quick note. You don't actually want to make these threads incredibly high contrast with the area underneath. If you do so, you will end up with the shadow in between the threads being too deep and too dark. If that happens, it's not a big deal. You can just glaze over the entire surface. So you can, if you end up in a space where you took the highlight too far, and then the threads in between your shadow are like really, really dark, right? And it's like, well, that's not how sweater looks. They don't have like a deep blue shadow in between white threads or something, right? It's no big deal. You can just glaze the midtone. In this case, for me, that would be like the mix, basically, of the two main pinks here. And I would go over the whole surface. That will bring down the highlights and bring up the shadows. So bringing the whole area closer together, okay? Now, when I'm working more on the shadow side, I do just go and mix some of the thread colors, like out of those shadows. So I take the original violet red, work my way down into what I had originally glazed with the violet red plus Payne's gray. That's how I break the edges up. Okay, so that's the majority of the pink done and ready to go. But that feels kind of flat and empty. I think it looks okay. It looks like it kind of gives that wool impression, but we need to sell it. So let's put a cool school logo on here. In this case, it's going to be a big letter B. My wife walked down and saw it and said, is that for Bayside? Sure, why not? I was thinking B for Buffy. Why would she have her own letter on her sweater? I don't know, 'cause. I doubt she actually goes to school as a vampire, but who knows? At any rate, let's just say it's for Bayside. And so I start by just carefully lining that out with, again, a dark midtone. Slightly darker than my midtone. In this case, it's going to be a medium gray. We're going to use this section of paints right here. That's going to be my grays I work with. And so I start lining out that B, and then I just build it up, slowly turning it into a block letter. Now, if at any point you get kind of paint outside of where you want it, don't worry. You can come back in with the pink and just adjust the edges very carefully. It's not a problem at all. And so once it's in there, I've got that laid down. I got that block in place. We're ready to go. What I then do is go in start adding in whites. And what you're going to see me do here is effectively recreate the thread pattern on the freehand letter B. Now, if you know exactly what you want at the beginning, you could do this all at once. Like that is to say, you could just do the midtone, the original violet red that I did, then knock in the gray and just do the threads around it. For me, I like actually working over top. I don't know why I like doing it that way. That's just the way I've become comfortable with it. You can work whatever way is comfortable for you. There's no one road to Rome. But so I build up through into sort of the brighter white. Again, I'm following the highlights that I already did on the pink. I'm following the threads and their positions and so on. So in some places, there'll be a thread where half of it is pink and then it transitions right in the middle and becomes white-gray. That's fine. let that be. That's the showing that it's still the same thread, it's just been dyed differently or stamped or whatever has happened to make that color appear on the material. So once I've got that B all knocked in, I do take a little bit of Payne's Gray and I just kind of knock a little tiny, very thin shadow underneath, like basically on the low side of it. I do this to give it a slight impression of a raised surface, as though these threads or this impression or whatever it is has this slight raise to it over the other threads, just to create some visual separation. If you do this step, you want it to be razor thin. Sharpest brush you've got, very thin, very flowing paint. Okay, that gives us the wool sweater. But I didn't want to stop there, because the edges, I wanted to create contrast. So she has the sweater, but then there's these clear like bands around the edge of the sweater. And I could have just done those in some normal style, made them sort of like it looked just like normal cloth, like we would normally highlight cloth. But I thought it'd be fun to make them look more like silk or satin or something like that. So I pictured kind of the edge of the sweater being a sort of satin stripe of cloth. And so for that, we needed to get really shiny. So for what we're going to do here is we're going to take these 3 purples, and you'll notice here we are running a heck of a gamut, right? We're starting in this very dark terrestrial purple, going up to white blue. Now we're not actually going to use pure white blue anywhere, but this is still the kind of paints we're going to run. I start by just base coating everything in the dark terrestrial purple. Where I want the silk, we have to show the contrast. Painting silk or satin is almost like painting non-metallic metal. It's very, very high gloss, shiny surface, so it's going to use a lot of the same tricks. This white blue, by the way, is very similar to the highlights that are on her skin and in her hair and so on, so that's just going to be color aligned with everything else. Okay, so then what I start doing is integrating in the purple, and here, instead of using, like the cross-hatching texture we did above, now I'm using very thin individual lines, like individual, very ultra-thin hashes to build up my height. So you'll notice everything I'm doing is these very thin, sharp lines. Think of it almost like brushed steel. That's what's going to give you that sort of satin cloth impression, because satin is not only very shiny, but it's made out of very thin thread that's been sort of woven together, right? So we want to capture that thread with these very thin, sharp lines. So I build it up, and then what I do is just start integrating in, moving to the normal. I started with just integrating the purple, then I do the purple by itself, and then eventually we'll move to integrating more and more of the white blue. I never cut out the purple, I just do 2 different steps of white blue integrated with my mid-tone purple. But what I do is then continue to build up the thin lines. But you'll notice each time I do so, I'm covering less and less of the space. So this is just like layering. It is shingles on a roof. You cover less each time, no problem. You can always go back and mix half steps if you want to kind of blend it all together, right? But the goal here is each time I'm getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and you'll notice the points I pick for the highest highlights are in line with where I had the sharpest, brightest highlights on the sweater as well. So all of your highlights, all of your light lines need to align, right? Light travels in an individual line and sort of the specular reflection to the viewer. So you can see how I build up and build up and build up into this near white blue bright reflection, doing it through these sharp thin lines. And what that will give the impression of is satin, okay? So it's actually a very simple process. What I wanted to show you this for was to show you that the real power in conveying the information about different types of cloth texture is often in just how you apply it. If you use thin dots, thin scratchy lines, thick threads like a cross-hatching scheme, you can communicate very different types of cloth. But you'll notice the rules of light and shadow of value never change. Think of it, I think where people get tripped up is once you stop with just the straight layer of just like I paint in a swoosh, and then I paint in a swoosh, and then I paint in a swoosh, and I cover less each time with each one of my swooshes, I think people's brains break. But it's not hard. You're doing the same thing, covering less each time, layering up, shingles on a roof. It's just instead of doing a swoosh with your brush, you're doing some cross-hatching, or you're doing thin lines, or you're doing pointy dots. But it gets to the exact same place and needs to run the same value depending on what you're trying to communicate. Bright satin, shiny things will be shiny and go very bright. matte things like wool will be very diffuse and large and will not have intense highlights. Okay, there you go. Here's how she looks right now. She's still very much whip. I've got a lot more to do on her, but I'm very happy with how she's coming along and coming out. So I'm really excited to keep painting her up. If you liked this, give it a like. Subscribe for additional hobby cheating. We have new videos here every Saturday. If you've got any questions I didn't answer, drop those down in the comments below. I always answer every question asked on the channel. Thank you again to Miniac for providing me this figure. It is incredible and I love it. I don't know if he has any left, but I will include a link below to all of Miniac's stuff so you can go see that and check it out. Also, if you want to support the channel, help us keep making videos. There's lots of ways you can do so, and it's deeply appreciated. There's affiliate links down there where you can purchase all your hobby supplies. Doesn't cost you anything extra. In fact, it usually saves you money. There's the new game, or there's the games that Uncle Adam and I make. We just released our newest game, so check that out down below. It is a sequel to Rain in Hell called Rain in Iron. And also, of course, there's our Patreon focused on review and feedback. And taking your next step on your hobby journey. We'd love to have you as part of the community. As always, though, I thank you so much for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.